So once again, it's time to punish Russia. It's becoming a ritual to sanction them once a month. The US is about to hit Russian energy again, but just like everything else, this will boomerang back on them. The Senate has passed a bill to ban uranium imports from Russia. The US plans to stop buying enriched uranium to hurt Russian revenues, and all that's left is for Biden himself to sign the bill. According to the act, the US will be prohibited from importing Russian uranium within 90 days. Of course, there will be temporary waivers until 2028, but there's a real fear of retaliation. Once again, this is playing with the supply and demand of energy, except this time it hurts America and their allies more. When you still import a ton of uranium from Russia, cutting it away is going to cause havoc on the price of energy generation. And here's the big problem. Russia is still a huge exporter of uranium to the US. 24% of nuclear power fuel in America is Russian. It's the second biggest source of the commodity, and to cut the supply away will cause a lot of problems. Sure, Biden can always get more from the UK and the Eurozone. They provide around 30% of supply. But there are countries in Europe itself that relies on nuclear power as well, and this includes the UK, France, and Switzerland. By cutting Russia away, America will be competing for a smaller pool of uranium supply in the world. Energy prices there could fly up as well, and we all know Europe is far from being self-sufficient in energy. And just within the US, there's a real fear of prices going up. Sure, the US pays Russia $1 billion a year to keep the uranium flowing. So the idea here is to cut $1 billion of funding to Moscow's war chest. But replacing the uranium is a challenge, and it could spike the cost of supply up by 20%, not just for the US but for the collective West as well. It's important we keep in mind the state of the US economy. They can't really afford interest rates to stay higher for longer. We just saw another bank collapse in the US. Republic Bank went under because of higher interest rates. It hurt the value of their bonds, securities, and commercial real estate investments. Their balance sheet exploded, and that caused the bank to go insolvent. The longer rates stay high, the foundation of the US economy itself becomes shakier, and it threatens to topple this house of cards. A new banking crisis could erupt down the road. However, the Fed can't cut rates fast enough because of inflation. It is still very sticky. Oil prices might have dropped, but the risks are still building. Ukraine still hammering on Russian refineries, and the OPEC oil cuts aren't done yet. So there's still risk in the system for oil prices to stay higher for longer. It doesn't just affect gas prices at the pump, it eventually leaks into every facet of consumer prices. Since February 2021, prices across the board have been rising. Power is up by 27%, food increased by 21%, and the core CPI has risen by nearly 17%. Just look at the line here, guys, it's all the way up. As the US continues to cut away Russian energy, this is going to extend the cost of living crisis, and this in turn forces the Federal Reserve to halt their rate cuts. Economic growth in the US and the world will be affected. The US today generates a lot of power from uranium. Almost 19% comes directly from nuclear. It's bigger than wind, hydropower, and coal power. And if you sum up all the renewable energies, nuclear is almost on par, just 3% short. And that's how reliant the US is on nuclear power today. So if you cut away a quarter of US uranium supply, which is the fuel for nuclear power stations, energy prices will go up. Now, just because you have gas or coal-fired plants doesn't really mean it's a one-to-one swap with nuclear energy. That's not the case here. Compared to oil, gas, and coal, nuclear power is superior. It's 8,000 times more efficient at producing energy versus fossil fuels. And the difference is very apparent when we look at the large-scale power generation. It's not just about efficiency. According to the EIA, nuclear power plants have the highest capacity factor. The higher the capacity factor, the longer the power plant can generate maximum output for a period of time. Nuclear power comes in at 92.5%. Conversely, gas plants are only at 56%, while solar panels are the worst at 25%. And this means in a year, nuclear energy can produce maximum power output at 93% of the time during the year, near uninterrupted power at full blast. Trying to replace nuclear power with conventional gas or even coal-fired energy will be costly and grossly inefficient. And good luck trying to construct more solar panels or hydroelectric dams. Those will take a lot of time to build out at scale. Even if you can conjure them up from thin air, the cost of making them will far exceed the cost of nuclear fuel. At the very best, you'll just get intermittent supply that isn't reliable. And if the US wants to move manufacturing back home, having a reliable source of energy is necessary, is mandatory. America has big plans, right, to build US industries back. They're trying to win over, attract chip companies like TSMC. And these are energy intensive sectors that devour energy, and there can't be any interruption. That's why cutting Russian uranium away is a very risky move. Within the US itself, the effects of this energy crisis won't be spread evenly. Certain states will be clobbered harder than others. Illinois, for example, is a state run by nuclear power. They have 11 reactors that produce 52% of their total power supply. What will happen to power prices in Illinois if nuclear fuel from Russia gets cut off? What will happen to industries there? Can a state compete with the rest of the US? Can they really compete with other hubs like China? And these are serious questions to ask before Biden signs the bill into law. The problem with commodity sanctions is the blowback effect. Russia is a big commodity producer and exporter, from oil and gas all the way to metals and gold. They have the entire market cornered, which means cutting them away will cause inflation to soar. Just because you stop buying from Moscow doesn't mean the rest of the world will play ball. Now, 2 weeks back, the US issued a ban on Russian metals. Aluminum, copper, and nickel produced in Russia can't enter the Western metal exchanges, and this includes the COMEX in America and the LME in the UK. That was a big mistake because Russia is the biggest source of metals across the LME. 91% of aluminum and 62% of copper in their stockpiles were Russian. Sooner or later, the stockpiles will be drained away and cause a supply side crisis. And we have said it would happen, and true enough, it happened in record time. It's not just the end users or companies buying up commodities. There are traders out there in the markets looking to make a ton of money as well. Big traders like Glencore and Trafigura are gaming the system. They are draining the LME of aluminum to spike prices higher. They know the West won't reverse the sanctions and fresh Russian supply won't refill the LME for a very long time. Within a week, the traders went in and they bought physical aluminum for delivery. They withdrew the physical metal from the LME stockpiles. They essentially triggered a physical squeeze on the metals. They took out nearly 200,000 tons of physical metal. That's nearly $500 million worth of supply drained from the exchange. And when you constrict supply when demand is still there, you cause prices to fly up, which is exactly what happened. And these are the unintended consequences of US commodity sanctions. Within a few days, the price of aluminum in the LME flew up by nearly 10%, going past $2,700 at one point. The results are unambiguous. Raw materials across the board, they're going to get more expensive. From aluminum to copper and nickel, the cost of making stuff will go higher, especially when the West is desperately trying to rearm Ukraine. Even the price of sodas might go up. The can itself is made of aluminum, let's not forget that. And this is going to trickle once again down to the US consumer. Russian revenues won't be affected, they can sell to China and the rest of the world. If the overall price of aluminum rises high enough, they might even earn more. The West will be affected more. And this is the risk of the uranium sanctions as well, the law of unintended consequences. While the US can go around and cut supply, it doesn't mean Russia is powerless. The issue here is the timeline of the uranium ban. While the ban stops Russian supply in 90 days, there are still temporary waivers until January 2028. And this means the US can still import uranium from Putin for the next 3.5 years. Maybe it's an emergency or to stockpile uranium ahead of the ban. Either way, the supply isn't fully cut yet. But that is assuming Russia will play ball. You are assuming that supply from Moscow will be flowing at your beck and call, that Putin will keep to the schedule of US imports. But consider this, last December there were rumors of a reprisal, that the Kremlin might take preemptive action. If legislation was passed to ban Russian imports, they could strike first, and this means cutting supply off immediately. The US law will be effectively useless. The source itself would have cut off uranium exports, so there's nothing left to cut on the US side. Now, whether that's true or not, it's a possibility that can't be ignored. US companies will have to scramble around for new imports. According to the Congressional Budget Office, a ban on Russian imports could spike nuclear fuel costs across the US by 13%. And if Russia ignores the waivers, it could rise much higher. And this is a tail risk that could erupt if Biden signs this into law. The good news is that reactors refuel every 1 to 2 years, maybe 3 years at the max. So there are still existing contracts in effect. But going forward, things might get dicey. To build back US industries, cheap, abundant, and uninterrupted energy is needed. There can be no compromise on this, so you can really see the issue here. Another problem is potential reprisals to Europe. If the EU decides to join the US and ban Russian supply, they will be in a world of hurt. In 2021, the Eurozone imports 20% of their uranium fuel from Russia. Moscow is their third largest supplier, and their biggest supplier isn't on good terms with France, which is Europe's biggest uranium consumer. The dependence on Russian supply is very real, not just for the US but for Europe as well. The supply of cheap, clean, and efficient energy is now at risk, but the situation just got worse. While Europe has cut away Russian oil and gas, their dependence on uranium has actually increased. In a report by the Bellona Center, the EU has almost doubled their import of Russian nuclear fuel. It reached nearly 700 million euros last year. They essentially swapped their dependency on natural gas for uranium. And the first country to feel the pain will be France. 70% of their power generation comes from nuclear power alone. Their supplies in Africa are highly unstable, and if Putin cuts supply off, it won't be good for France. Every action could trigger a reaction. Banning Russian supply now sounds great, but you risk opening up Pandora's box. And if Biden signs the bill and Russia cuts supply, this will spark havoc in the global uranium market. As it stands, Russia exports around $2.6 billion worth of uranium to the world. If supply to the US and the EU stops, Russia will sell their outstanding production elsewhere. They will sell it to China. Beijing will happily snap up this cheap supply from Russia. And yes, China does have nuclear power plants as well. They have everything, right? And if the West won't buy it, China will, and they'll get it at a discount. Reuters estimates that China has been stockpiling a lot of uranium. Over the past decade, they built a reserve of over 120,000 tons, and that's enough to meet their nuclear demand for the next 10 years. The US ban is only going to help China buy up more of the commodity. They will become even more energy secure at a cheaper price. And these are the second order consequences of the ban. Sure, it will most definitely decouple the West from Russian supply, but is this really considered a win? Russia might lose some revenue, but your energy costs will rise as well. Your biggest economic rival will also enjoy cheaper fuel thanks to a more abundant supply. And this helps China's manufacturing push further ahead and hurts America's plan to industrialize. In essence, it doesn't really make sense. But like all other sanctions, economics don't apply here, it doesn't matter. So hang tight, guys, it's gonna come sooner or later. But let me know what you think. Is the Russian uranium ban a good idea? And what's really the point of this? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.